It was at a point when Chris almost wanted to leave Savatage to work with us and that because, he heard basically his brother being back to what the original Savatage was like again.
Your home for melodic heavy metal. This is the Signals of Intuition.
There's brand new Spirits of Fire right there with their track Into the Mirror from their brand new album Embrace the Unknown, coming out on February 18th on Frontiers Records. You're listening to the Signals of Intuition, your home for melodic hard rock and heavy metal. And tonight on the show, we've got the guitar player and main songwriter of that band, Mr. Chris Caffery. Chris, you may know, is one of the lead guitar players in Trans-Siberian Orchestra. He also played in Savatage throughout much of their career, either as a touring member and then later on from about 1995 onward as an official member and one of the main songwriters in that band as well. Chris has also had a fantastic solo career, played with bands like Metallium and many others. So let's get Chris on the line right now.
Brandon.
Hey, Chris, how's it going?
It's going good, sir. Sorry I'm a little late because everything always goes a little bit longer, so I'm going to try to catch up for the 5 minutes that we lost.
Oh, no. That's no worries. Trust me. I'm honestly really bad for that because I always come with a lot of questions. So,
yeah, no, that's all right. I'll try to be. I always come with really super long answers, so it's like, oh Jesus.
You're my dream interview then. That's perfect. So you're telling me I prepared too much, is what you're saying. Oh, that's all good. So when I do these, I always like to start at the beginning of you as a musician and then work our way up to the new record. So starting from the beginning, where did you grow up and how did you get started in music?
I actually grew up in northern New Jersey. I was born in New York and raised in North Jersey. And ever since I can remember, music is all I ever wanted to do. I mean, I don't think I ever was even willing to accept anything else. So I'd always looked at guitars and been fascinated with them. But when I was, I think, 5 or 6, I went to show and tell and sang Help from the Beatles. And I just, that's what I wanted to do. And I just had a love for heavier music. When my love for the Beatles was known by my neighbors and they bought Wings Over America for me for Christmas, and I just started hearing heavier music. And then I got Kiss Alive and the first Boston record in the same day, and I was poisoned after that. It was like, I just went to Sabbath and Priest and Maiden. And, by the time I was 10, I started really playing guitar. And then I started playing shows and things when I did my first bar show, I think when I was 13 or 14. My mom had to drive and let us in. But, by the time I was 17 years old, I had gotten some good demos done with my band. My band was opening for, it was a band called Antia that I had, A-N-T-I, I had with my brother, and we were opening for like Metallica and a lot of other bands in our local scene. And we were having a lot of trouble finding singers, but I had wound up actually meeting the singer of the band Heaven in New York City, and Mitch Perry had just left that band. And at the age of 17, I met this guy and gave him a demo, and I got into that band. Paul O'Neill was the manager and producer, and my life had pretty much changed and become what it was for the last, over 35 years from that. I mean, it just basically went into that world. I met Paul, then Paul started working with Savatage, and then he got me involved with that. And then, from Savatage came Dr. Butcher, and then we wound up having the birth of TSO happen, and I was a part of that. And, everything that kind of stemmed along from one night being out in a club in New York City with my brother's fake ID. I tell people, I'm like, and I'm not suggesting people have fake ID, but at that point in time, New York had just went from 19 to 21, and my brother was 19 right when that change happened. So you were grandfathered in, and there was no picture driver's licenses yet. So I had his driver's license, and when it went to 21 was, I think, when they first started making picture licenses, and I had his driver's license and social security card, and it basically had his wallet. So he would have his picture license, and we'd go to clubs, and I'd walk in, and then he would make sure I got it, and then he would follow. And those bouncers never checked the names. And I wasn't drinking. I was just a little kid that wanted to get into the clubs. I mean, I was seeing people like Malmsteen and other people at a very young age that were playing bars. And like I said, that I always tell people there's a lot of luck and timing in the music business. And had I not been in that one particular nightclub in New York City on this one Thursday night way back when, I might not have had my career go the same way at all. So it's kind of one of these things where, like I said, I'm not suggesting go use fake ID. That wasn't it at all. But I always tell people that, maybe some of those nights you might think you're too tired to show up somewhere. It might be that night you go in there and something really special might come about. But that's basically me in a nutshell.
It's so funny you mentioned Heaven. I literally picked up their record yesterday. And I was shocked because I was going to ask you a question about that because I had no idea you were part of that band. And I guess they were in New York for a little while, working? Because I always thought of them as an Australian band, and I'm like, how would Chris even be a part of these guys? So I guess that makes sense.
Well, what happened was Paul produced the Knockin' on Heaven's Door record, and that arrangement of that song was actually Paul's idea, which is pretty funny because the Guns N' Roses one is oddly familiar, but nobody ever really credits that. The Heaven version is, in my opinion, the best cover of that song I ever heard, and it was just really good. And they were getting a lot of steam on MTV, and I actually went to see them. I was good friends with Ray Gillen. I went to see Heaven play on a New Year's Eve gig, and I went with Ray to this club in Queens, and he introduced me to Paul, and I met the band. And I think that was the year, that might have been 85 to 86 New Year's, and then, or was it 86 to, yeah, I think it was 85 to 86. And it was later in that year that I found out that Mitch had left the band. So there was a band, I guess, of how Paul liked to have people living around him in the city. We did it with Savatage too. So in Astoria, the singer of Heaven had an apartment where he was living, and I just got that gig, and he came to my house. I went down there. We started writing. Actually, one of the songs I wrote with them, Heaven released on a video after I was out of the band. It was a song called Boys Night Out that's actually you can find out on YouTube. And I just had got that, but I think the whole thing business wise, it was kind of falling apart, and Columbia wasn't going to be working with them anymore, and Paul was really focusing a lot of attention on Savatage. So he made the move away from working with them, and I made the move into working more with Paul and Savatage. So it was kind of that, just all happened to be local at that point, and the management company Paul was with, Lieber Krebs, they were the biggest management company on the planet at the time. So it was just a lot of different things that they had going on. And then when I started working with Savatage, there was a lot of different Atlantic things that they had me do. There was a thing they had called Big Mouth. It was like a heavy metal rap thing that I did a video for. I actually made it to MTV, I think, before I was 20 years old with that one. But they moved me from that over the Dirty Looks, and then me and the singer in Dirty Looks just didn't really gel very well.
That's I had no idea you were in that band either. That's hilarious.
The Turn of the Screw record, I wrote songs and recorded all the basic tracks with those guys, and that it was just a real, I don't speak ill about the Dead, but Henrik definitely had a lot of personality flaws. But I started working with, going back to Savatage, the Lever brothers called me up and said, "Hey, you want to join the band?" And it was just a place that I was meant to be anyway. So I did the Mountain King tour, but I didn't stay in the band at that time. I was just hired to do keyboards and guitars and basically be a side stage thing for Mountain King. But through that, we developed a friendship and a chemistry that the Lever brothers knew was something very cool. And we just got together, and Savatage became a 5-piece with me. And that was the rest. That was history with that. But it all stemmed about through Paul O'Neill and my connections with that whole organization.
It's hilarious. That one chance meeting just set the course of your life right there. Like you say, in a bar in a right place.
No, exactly.
Tell me about the Dr. Butcher record. To me, it's pretty much it's a early Savatage, but pretty much thrash metal version of that. Tell me about doing that, because I know John had sort of left Savatage at that point. So you and him did that. How did that whole band come together?
Well, like I said, I was having trouble finding a singer with my band with my brother, but that's what I did as a child. And I was kind of, I'll say foolish, but I was uneducated on the business back then. And, when you're younger too, you kind of like to devote yourself to one thing. Whereas nowadays, you have people, I won't name names, that are in like 97 different bands. And
every drummer I know.
Exactly. But back then you wanted to be in one band. So my brother was getting pretty depressed about me not working with him and being in Savatage. And, it was still basically Chris Oliva's thing, being I was playing guitar with him, but I was basically rhythm. So it was fun for me. But I should have stayed in Savatage instead of leaving to go try to get things going with my brother, which I did, mostly because of my brother. My brother was getting very depressed about, the success of Savatage and us not working. And, I actually had just found John West and we started working on this thing called Witch Doctor. But me and my brother kind of fell apart musically. It was really weird. Like he wanted to do stuff that was more in a Whitesnake form of music, and I wanted to do things that was more in a Savatage form. So I basically left the band that I wanted to be in, And when John parted ways with Savatage at the time of Streets, me and him just hooked up. I was really only gone from that whole family about a year, and then John was down at his friend's house in Zephyr Hills, Florida. He said, "Why don't you come down and hang out?" And it was probably early. It was early 92 probably. And we just were hanging out really at his friend's house watching freaking sports, and none of us were driving down there. His friend had a broken arm, so we had taxi cab drivers bringing us bottles of Jack Daniels, and we sat there hanging out, and all of a sudden a guitar riff started, and we had a 4-track, and we started writing music, and that was the birth of Dr. Butcher. It was kind of John just and me wanted to do something that was fun and heavy and had some sarcasm in it and our sense of humor. And because, John wanted to do heavier music at the time too, and so did I. So we started the birth of Dr. Butcher in Florida. And, it was at a point where Chris almost wanted to leave Savatage to work with us and that because he heard basically his brother being back to what the original Savatage was like again. And Chris had then found Zach and they kept things going with Ezra Thorns. But, there was a lot of different talk going on at that time. And Butcher was just something that was really natural for both me and John. And I think with my frustration with my brother and his frustration with his brother, we came together basically as brothers. I think, John is my illegitimate brother. And it's kind of, we just wrote this record and it was really natural for us and it was a lot of fun. And that thing, I think, is some people always call it the Savatage record that was not under the name of Savatage. In a lot of ways, that Butcher record was just that. It was like the heavy Savatage songs that didn't make it onto records. And it was just a lot of fun. And then, unfortunately, in the process of writing that and getting ready to record the record, Chris had passed away. And then John was he was nailed by that, personally and emotionally. And he went and did Handful of Rain as a way to get himself mentally through the loss of his brother. And Savatage kept going. And obviously the need for John to be a part of that. And then it was just kind of like, well, it makes sense for us both to go back into the band. And that's what it eventually happened with Dead Winter Dead. And, the Butcher thing kind of just went to the side because it became something that wasn't essentially necessary at the time. It's not like something I wouldn't have wanted to do every single year. It just kind of, with TSO being born and Savatage playing, there just wasn't really enough time for us to do it or tour it or anything like that. So it went into the vaults of heavy metal, but it's definitely a classic record, and it's something that I would always do again at any given time with John. But I love that record. It falls into my definitely top 5 of my favorite records that I've been a part of in my career. I mean, I've played on over 100 albums, and it's like that one definitely falls into the top 5. And actually, this new Spirits of Fire record kind of falls, if it's not the top 5, it's definitely the top 10 of metal records that I've worked on. It definitely has that feeling to me of something I think that is going to have a lot of legs with the metal fans.
I have to agree. I do want to talk about that, and I've got some comments about that too, but I completely agree with that comment. Another band, I just want to jump around a little bit more. The way that I became aware of your name, I knew Savatage and Dr. Butcher and some of the other stuff you had done, but I didn't know the name Chris Caffery at the time until I saw it associated with a band from the late 90s, Metallium. How did you become involved with those guys? They're German. Were you just a producer? Were you a member of the band for the time? Tell me about that whole thing.
That's a good question. I mean, God bless Lars had just, we were actually talking about doing a reunion with the original lineup, and Lars passed away in a small plane crash last year, the bass player and the former of that. But, It's kind of one of these things that just came out of nowhere, and that falls in my top 5 of favorite metal records that I've been a part of. That record was really classic, but the thing was, I didn't know I was in Metallium. It's really hard to explain this. I did a tour, a cover band thing before anybody else was doing this stuff. Me and Mike Tirana and John West and Baron Kubois, who's the bass player now in the Michael Schenker group. He's a guy from Holland. There was a promoter that wanted us to do a tour in Europe. He had an idea of America Rock Live. It was supposed to be Americans, and we had a Dutch bass player, but we went over there and played music from all of our catalogs, being that Mike, the Malmsteen and John West catalog and my stuff with Savatage and everything. And we did a tour. Now, this guy who was the person who put this together was Lars, the bass player from Metallium. And he saw me and he knew how big Savatage was getting at that time. It was probably late 98. We just headlined Bakken, I think, for the first time then. So we were very, very, very big in Europe. And Lars's brain, his business brain, always called him the poor man's Gene Simmons, but he had the idea of doing Metallium, and he found this singer, Henning Bosse, who was he was like a teenager, I think, at that time, 19 maybe. And he had these demos. Now, when Savatage was touring in the fall after that, he's like, hey, would you mind coming down and playing a couple guest guitar solos? And I'm like, no, that'd be fun. So I went to the studio and I did 2 songs I played a couple solos on. And then I got a phone call from him going, oh, everybody loves this. I got Metallium a very nice record deal. Would you want to come and co-produce and maybe if you have some extra music and, play guitar on a record as a guest? And I'm like, yeah, that'd be fun. So I go to Hamburg in February of 1999, I believe it was. And I wound up producing and engineering all the guitars. I didn't even know what the hell I was doing. I got put in front of an SSL with 2.5-inch freaking tapes, and I had to load the machines, and I recorded all those guitars. And there was 3 or 4 songs I wrote on that record, and I finished the guitars, and then I was getting ready to fly home, and there was a big press thing going on. And then Lars was like, we need you to take photos tomorrow. I'm like, photos? What do you mean? And he comes to me and he says, I need you in this photo shoot or my house of cards will fall. And that's when I found out that his great record deals he got with Metallium were put together by him telling the record label I was a member of the band. So that was the reality of that, which, kind of weighed a lot of different ways to me. I was a little late in the process to wander away. So I'm like, all right, I could do a photo, but I want to be like positioned differently. So there's some odd press photos of me where I look like the heavily disassociated artist, But it was just kind of weird with that. And then Mike Tirana and the bass player Lars, they didn't get along. Mike left in the middle of the first shows we were doing. So there was just some weirdness that was existing. And then, they were really heavy on using the Savatage name on things, which, was kind of awkward for me with my relationship with Savatage. So I just kind of walked away from it and only did the one record. I mean, I wouldn't have minded to do more, but that's kind of what that went. But that single record was, that has gone down in one of the freaking most known and respected European power metal records ever. And it's something, I love that album, that first Metallium record. That's a really strong record. And we did a tribute song to Lars that we released over the summer for him. It's called Never Surrender, that we all wrote together because, he was who he was. He was a likable pain in the ass. So it was like one of these things where you knew what he was about. And that's where that came out. But like I said, I was in a band I didn't know I was in.
That's great. That's hilarious. All right. We're quickly running out of time. So I want to talk your new really great record with Spirits of Fire, Embrace the Galaxy. Tell me about this record. The last one you had Ripper. This one you've got Fabio Leone singing. Tell me about doing this record. Was this a COVID record that so many people are putting out right now?
This was going to get done anyway. In January of 2020, Frontiers came to me and said, are you ready to do another Spirits of Fire record? And I said, yeah. And at that point in time, they had told me that that Ripper and them could not reach an agreement to do the next record. And Ripper's a really good friend of mine, but I had not really spoken to him about it. He just said with them there was a decision for Ripper not to do the next record, and they said, "Well, I still want to do the record." And I'm like, "Well, I'd still like to make music. I liked making the metal." It's just funny to me because Ripper was a huge reason why I did the first record, but I was like, "Well, if we could find somebody great, I would consider it." And then I just started writing, and I'm like, well, geez, if I'm going to have to do this record and Ripper's not going to be involved, we're going to be destroyed by the press if the record and the fans if this record's not great. So my goal was just to write the best possible music I could, and hopefully that they got a really good singer to go on top of it. And I started writing, and we actually started working with Todd Hall at first. And Todd was doing some really good writing. A lot of stuff was kind of similar in feel and sound to what we had on this record, but Todd, his schedule and his personal life had some reasons where he didn't move forward with it. And then Frontiers had put Fabio into the mix. And I think, us, the guys in the band, were like, well, we don't care who does the singing as long as they're great at what they're doing. So we listened to what Fabio was going to be doing and got some ideas, some demos on top of my music. And we're like, wow, this could be really cool. So I think I sent 18 songs to the producer, and he picked 11, or I added a 12th one in the end. And we just started working. I had demo versions of the stuff, and Zonder did his drums, which is what I wanted. I wanted him to do the drums before I did my guitars so I could play on top of them and kind of write new parts and pieces along with his fills, which really worked. But it wasn't a COVID thing. We were doing this regardless. The thing that played to our advantage as far as COVID goes, and I say this selfishly, was the fact that I got special added time out of everybody because of the fact that everybody was home. I mean, I'm usually home from the beginning of the year till TSO time, whatever time of the year that was. But since Paul passed, it was really only November and December. So I'd work on my solo records and I take care of my mom. So I spend a lot of time at home. I got my art and other businesses. So I'm not looking to travel all year long unless I have to. So I always have the time to do what I needed to do. But I think this record, everybody had a little bit of time extra and a little bit of focus extra. And I think it's made this sound more like a band than the first record. And I think it's made it a better record than the first record. I think it just has a real cool feel to it. And when I was done with it, I find myself grabbing this one to listen back to. It's just, to me, it's a really cool piece of work. It's a fun piece of art. It's a really fun listen front to back. And I think Fabio, he took this, and I hadn't really spoken to him personally about it, but Ripper is one of the most well-known and best singers, metal singers on the planet. And if you're going to go in there and do something that he was doing, I mean, he went very metal on this in a way that I had not heard in particular from him. And there was even people when I first was playing this finished record that didn't know who was singing because of how he sounded. So there was just something he did, and it all came together. And I think, to me, it just sounds really coherent and like a band. And I was very, very happy with this. Steve's bass on this record's insanely amazing. And it's just a whole record. I mean, Zonder's parts, I let him go, and then I just kind of played around him. So his fills became parts of the songs and new riffs. And it was these things where I was just kind of really having fun with it. And I wrote some complete songs on that first record. This time I wrote the guitars and the music, and I got to focus on my guitars. And being a guitar player, I think, is also a difference with this record too. I rose my own playing up because that's all I had to do.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Fabio thing, because I was going to mention, like, he really went into, Ronnie James Dio, Tim Ripper Owens, a style with his voice that, like you say, I haven't heard from him. I'm a huge fan of his, and it was stunning to hear. I was like, wow, he is just killing it. Like, he totally pushed himself into a way more metal sound, and it's like, I hope he continues with that kind of vibe, because it's killer. It's absolutely killer.
Yeah, no, you listen to it and you'll hear 5-10% of the record come out being your classic way he sounds, but the most of this, he went and just pulled this I always say, we put the metal to the pedal on this record, and he definitely threw the metal into what he did, and it's fun to listen to. If people were going, well, it sounds like Dickinson, it sounds like, but I couldn't get any. I don't think I had one person guess who this was correctly. I don't think one person, and a lot of people with tons of experience in metal radio and other things, and nobody was able to guess it was him.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible what you guys did. And I mean, I've got to say, so far is my favorite record of 2022, and it's going to be a hard one to beat.
Well, I appreciate that. I just, like I said, to me, it's a fun listen front to back. It keeps going. Like, I'll listen to it. I'll be like, oh, wow, I forgot about this song. So it's not like you don't get to the song. It's like, all right, let me fast forward through this one. It's like they're all got their own little things. And I think just about any songs could have been the videos for it. But the Into the Mirror song, the video's at about 160,000 views in like 10 days. It just has grabbed people in a real different way. I mean, the most views we had with a song, I think, was 140,000, 140 something with Lightspeed Marching, and that was 3 years ago. So we had more views than that in 10 days with this thing. So I think it's hitting, and I'm reading the comments. The fans are really excited. So I'm seeing, people from Peru and South America and Greece, and all these metal fans are like, wow, this is awesome. And that's, to me, the most important thing is that, okay, this is doing something to the metal fans that I've wanted things to do, like Dr. Butcher. It's hitting them the way that I wrote it, which is to be some cool heavy metal music. And, like I said, the finished product, what Fabio did with the vocals and lyrics, I think it rises to another level. He definitely took this and just married what we had, and all the way around, it's just a really solid piece of work.
Yeah, very true. Just really quick, WRIF in Detroit in 2005, they played the hell out of Pisses Me Off.
A lot of people did, and if I had a major label behind that song, that would have been humongous.
Yeah, I remember hearing that daily for like months. It was the craziest thing. I'm like, they're playing solo Chris Caffery right now? Are you kidding me? So
you know what? One day somebody will grab that record and be a movie or something. It's gonna have its day. Pisses Me Off will be my retirement fund one. So I just don't know when. It is one of the most classic, funny freaking things ever. Although I did like the Sick of the Shit that I put out during the pandemic was funny too.
Yeah.
That was a good metal song. It was actually a really fun metal tune, but obviously couldn't get too much radio play with the. All right, let me get running. That's my pattern today is be 10 minutes late for everybody.
Yeah. All right. Well, best of luck with this new record. It's absolutely killer, and I really hope you guys do another one like this, because I am very excited by what I'm hearing, and I'm going to be listening to it a lot more in the coming months.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.